This is Duke University.
This week on Office Hours, the natural and human worlds are constantly in flux, from changing weather patterns to information traveling on the internet. Adrian Bejan, a professor at Duke's Pratt School of Engineering, has developed a theory he says unites all such things under one principle. The constructal law has been used by Bejan and his colleagues to explain the design of the Eiffel Tower, animal locomotion, and the layout of the Atlanta airport, among many other observable patterns. In his new book, Design in Nature, he writes, "The constructal law is revolutionary because it is a law of physics. It governs any system, anytime, anywhere." Bejan joins us today to take your questions about the science of design in nature.
Welcome to Office Hours. I'm James Todd with Duke's News Office, and I am here with Adrian Bejan, the J.A. Jones Distinguished Professor of Mechanical Engineering at Pratt School of Engineering. Professor Bejan, thank you for holding online office hours.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm actually very flattered to be part of this show.
Great. So let's talk about the constructal law. It's a big idea. Can you talk about its scope, design in nature? What's the whole scope of the law?
Well, the scope is design in nature. In fact, any law of physics begins with the realization that there is a universal phenomenon out there. That is, a phenomenon means observations of the same kind that occur in the billions. And so the phenomenon is then screaming to be summarized in the form of a simple statement. Why? Because it's a lot easier for the human mind to remember the simple statement than to remember all the observations of this repeating phenomenon.
So let's start with the image and then get to the statement. You often use both rivers and trees as images, examples of the constructal law. Can you talk us through? We've got an image of the Mississippi River Basin, for example.
Correct. So that is the beginning of the aha, meaning the realization that there is a phenomenon. The river basin, the botanical tree, the lightning, the human lung. These are images that look the same. They're tree-shaped, yet they don't care about what flows. Some are inanimate and huge, others are animate and much smaller. And so all of a sudden, this particular phenomenon, design in nature, is so universal that it doesn't care about the famous division between biology and geophysics. It is, in fact, a phenomenon just like gravity, or gravitational fall, or the conservation of energy in thermodynamics. It is that kind of a phenomenon. And it calls for a statement, which means a law of physics of the same kind.
So let's give the statement.
A first principle. And that law, which you had on the screen already, is the tendency in nature that any finite size flow system, finite size means not infinitesimal, meaning something that we can see and touch, in order to persist in time, which means to live, must evolve, it must morph, it must contort itself in order to flow more and more easily for greater and greater access over time. So that's the statement. In it, you have design, which is configuration. The changes in that, which is evolution, and it is nothing but a statement of physics. You can use it to, so that in the dark of the night, with eyes closed, you see the movie of river basin evolution, you see the movie of animal design evolution, you see the movie of urban traffic evolution. You do not need to observe, to write down, to argue with your colleagues.
So let's take you've the river example again. I think that one's fairly intuitive. Water's flowing, and the configuration are the river beds, right? So what does the constructal law say about rivers and their patterns? How do you analyze them?
You heard the law. It says that in big history, this huge flow system, which actually connects a whole area with one point. The area is, in the case of the Mississippi, essentially 1/3 of the United States connected to one point, which is the Mississippi Delta, the mouth of it. This flow has been evolving to flow more and more easily, or to flow better. By the way, the constructor law defines what better means in physics. And there are many features, not many, but there are several important features of this flow architecture that are predictable or have been predicted from the constructor law. One is that, first of all, the configuration should be tree-shaped. Another is that every mother channel should have, on an average, 4 daughter tributaries. 4. That's an easy number to remember. Another is that there must exist a universal proportionality between river width and river depth, meaning wide rivers are also deep. This is the way the flow architecture should be. And by the way, should be is the key word, where the label of a law, meaning it is really the labor of the power to predict. Knowing the constructor law, I and my students know how things will be, because it is the law.
You talk about tree-shaped, so you're saying the constructor law says why a tree should be tree-shaped. Mm-hmm. How does it, from that sentence you just read that states the constructor law, how do you get a tree should be tree-shaped?
No, I did not. I said the river basin, our flow architecture should be tree-shaped. An alternative would be for the river basin to be nothing but a marsh, meaning without configuration. That is a possibility, but it is an extremely slow way to flow. And in fact, that is the way to flow as soon as the first raindrops hit the ground. The ground gets wet. By the way, you see this on along the line from first base, from home plate to first base during the baseball game. It's completely flat. It's been perfected. Then the rain comes. And if they don't call the game off, you actually see the river basin be born really right there on the red clay. That is where all the rivers basins come from. They come from the wet mud, which the seepage through which was replaced naturally because of this tendency called the constructor law. It was replaced by arborescent or tree-shaped flow architectures, each better than its predecessor.
I got you. And so we've used the example of the river, but you also used the example of the tree itself, the ultimately tree-shaped object. And so again, how does the constructor law from this, what you've read about a finite flow system, persistent time to live, its configuration must evolve in such a way that provides easier access to the currents that flow through it. How do you take that principle and then look at a tree and say, that's the way it should look?
Well, in fact, we took the constructor law, and that empowered us to act as if we never saw a tree in the garden, and it empowered us to actually predict the tree from root or the roots to the canopy, all the way to the design of trees of many sizes on the forest floor. And here is how. First, in order to use the constructor law in a predictive manner, you, the thinker, must agree with yourself that you understand what flows.
And trees don't move, so...
there you go. So what flows through a tree? The tree is, famously, as you say, not walking. So, two things flow through the tree. Among many other things, we're not looking at the birds and the insects and the plagues. We're looking at two things. The first is that water flows through the tree. The tree is basically responsible for putting the water back up there where it came from. Rain comes down, water goes up. It goes up not only through evaporation from the surface of the ocean and the lakes. It really gets its way upward through this additional design, which comes, of course, from the birth of the biosphere, which is vegetation. So vegetation is a flow system for water flowing upward. And so the flow configuration it must be such that it facilitates that flow. Well, our conclusion, because we published this in the Journal of Theoretical Biology, our conclusion is that after some back of the envelope pencil and paper application of invocation of the constructive law, the conclusion is that the vegetation architecture is very, very similar to the architecture of the river basin, except that the direction of the flow of water is the other way. Mm-hmm. So yeah, the botanical tree canopy is a lot more like the river delta. So that's one flow, but there's a second flow through this tree architecture. It has to do with the fact that the tree is strong, it's solid, it's made out of wood, and
the wind blows on it.
The wind blows, yes, that is something else that flows. The wind is blowing. Meaning the air is moving, the earth is not moving. Momentum or motion flows from the mover to the not mover, to the stationary. And this flow of momentum, in other words, the fast engaging the slow, is facilitated by flow configuration. We see this in the morphology of the waves on the surface of the ocean. The waves are such that they're always oriented across or perpendicular to the direction of the wind. The abandoned ships adrift orient themselves just like the waves. The tabular icebergs south of Greenland orient themselves the same way. And guess what? The botanical tree places its water pipes, which are the branches, in the wind in the same way, so that with finite size wood, the tree communicates, if you will, in the most efficient way, which means without stress concentrations. The stresses
so it's distributing the stresses.
Correct. Yeah, the stresses that flow from the wind force, which is drag, to the ground, which accepts the drag.
So then there's two flow systems. There's the water flow system and the stresses flow system that the trees.
Correct.
Balancing.
So that's one of the interesting coincidences of design in nature, is that one flow configuration is good, in fact exceptionally good for two flow systems at the same time, water and stresses.
We've got questions that have come in here from viewers, Professor Bejan, I want to get to. We've got a lot more to talk about here. And a reminder to everybody watching that you're invited to participate in this office hours conversation. You can send an email to live@duke.edu. You can tweet in your question with the tag Duke Live, or post to the Duke University Facebook page. So Jim has asked, does the constructal law apply all the way down to the quantum level? So what's the smallest sort of flow that this principle will apply to? In our work with the constructive law, we found absolutely no limit to the applicability of the idea, meaning applying the constructive law in a predictive sense. We've applied it all the way from predicting global climate to predicting the diameters of the hair strands on the back of the mouse. Small to big.
Correct. Yeah. So just like the law of gravitational fall or the first and second laws of thermodynamics, they apply to any system anywhere And so far, there's been no published refutation of the constructive law. Scientists were, let's say, familiar with the field that was just mentioned, should take a look. But I have to add the following observation. The constructive law begins with the word finite size. And I thought a great deal about this statement before I published it. And the reason is the following. Science began with geometry from the golden age of Greece and mechanics. These were macroscopic things. These are the science really of drawings, that's geometry, truths about relationships between drawings, geometry, trigonometry, and so on, and the science of contrivances made with those drawings. The contrivances are mechanics. The word mechanics comes from contrivance in Greek. So science developed famously all the way to acquiring its laws of thermodynamics by focusing human attention on the macroscopic. Then, 200 years ago, let me continue. 200 years ago, for reasons that are still not clear, physics became entranced in this idea that all these things that we know in physics must somehow have their origin at smaller and smaller and smaller scales. So during the past 200 years, and especially during the past century, we've had this, let's call it blind march toward the infinitesimal and the particles and the subparticles and all this other thing, which of course are very useful things if you look at what's come down the pipe in our technology,
mechanics.
Of course, and standard of living. However, during the noise of this successful parade or happy parade, one has forgotten where science came from. So, as I wrote in a book in year 2000, in fact, the last paragraph, I commented on the history of physics, and I said that the constructive law is a jolt the other way. It is an invitation to look at the whole, at finite-sized things, or if you want, at systems made out of immense numbers of particles, and to question the principle that stands behind this irrefutable phenomenon of nature, which is design.
And interestingly, you're saying that the design is not just to inanimate objects, water molecules flowing, and not even just to plants and animals, but to humans and what humans design and create, so buildings and cars. And if we could take the example of things that fly, it's in your book, to help us understand this, you're saying the constructive law is going to apply from everything from a mosquito up through birds, up through airplanes.
Right.
How is that?
Yeah, in fact...
That's counterintuitive.
Then you can start to imagine how excited I was when I made the discovery that everything that flies was designed in accord with the constructive law. It just happened that way because the law is an expression of a tendency in nature. I wrote this constructive law prediction of all flight on a whim, really, as I was finishing this book in the year 2000. The book is called Shape and Structure from Engineering to Nature. And I asked first, what does it take for a brick to fly at constant speed, at constant altitude? And I answered that with great ease. In fact, it took less than half a page to predict that...
So you're imagining wings on the brick, the mass of the brick.
No, I'm imagining nothing. I'm just imagining a mass. You could give that mass the name that you want, insect, bird, or airplane. And but because
the mass is the key feature.
Correct, and then and the mass, in order to proceed at constant speed unknown constant speed and constant altitude, that mass has to, I discovered, has to have a particular speed, a speed that is a particular multiple of the body mass raised to the power 1/6, and on and on. But this formula, which comes from the constructor law, turns out to do two things. It predicts the speeds of all the objects that are known to fly, from the house flight to the Boeing 747. But it also, for the first time, justifies the plotting of all these speeds on the same graph. Mm-hmm. This is the beauty that comes from the power of predicting with the constructor law. One ends up making drawings that were not made before. This, to me, as an engineer, is extremely rewarding. I'm not an entomologist. I'm not a ornithologist. I'm not anything. I'm a thermodynamicist. That's what I am.
And so you talk about the proportionality there of mass to velocity with regard to flying objects. Where does the math come in for the constructor law? I mean, I think when people think of laws of physics, they think Newton's second law, force equals mass times acceleration, Einstein's E equals mc squared. How do you bring the math in? What are the units?
I see. Okay, well, that's another misconception. What you just stated comes from the idea that in order for a truth to be correct, it must be a simple formula, a mathematical formula. Formulas are in fact shorthand for the other more laborious things, which were demonstrations with nothing more than a ruler and a compass in Greek geometry. So the formula is basically code language for saying something and saying it more compactly. It is not necessary for the truth to be spoken with one formula involving three letters, F, M, and A. Right. And that is very obvious when you look at the history of the second law of thermodynamics, which essentially says that a current by itself cannot flow by itself from low to high, meaning it always has a tendency to flow from high to low. The second law of thermodynamics was stated initially this way. In fact, the great vision of Sadi Carnot was that heat falls through the engine the way that water falls through the water wheel. No mathematics. No mathematics. The mathematics came a few decades later. It was invented by Clausius, who had, in order to have a formula of the kind you requested, in order to have the formula, he had to define the letters in the formula, and for that reason, Clausius defined entropy. But even after that, Clausius' formula was not an equation; it was an inequality, indicating the one-way tendency of currents in nature to flow from high to low. It is here, and I'm glad you bring up this. It is here in the discussion of the second law that you see what has been missing. The second law is
the second law of thermodynamics is related to the constructor law.
It is a neighbor. It is not related. There is no kinship between the two. But together they make a stronger physics, or a bigger tent under which now even more things fit. So the second law came, of course, from the heat engine, from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. It came from engineering, and it came and it accounts obviously for in that era for where the efficiency of engine comes from. But the second law says absolutely nothing about how things should be flowing by themselves from high to low. The constructor law accounts for the how. It is with the acquisition of configuration, which changes in time in a particular direction, so that the configurations, now a movie of them, become better and better flowing.
And again, if we give people a picture of rivers, water flowing from high to low, over time you get the pattern of the river beds.
Yeah, except that we don't have that. We don't have access to that movie. Why don't we discuss the heat engine? This great vision that gave us, in fact, our hugely high standard of living today. So, heat engines in the beginning. Right. Now, because of Carnot, we know that things of heat falls from high to low through the engine and turns the wheel of the engine and makes work and power. Great. Now, with the constructor law, we can predict that this flowing of the heat in order to produce work had to flow through better and better configurations to flow more and more easily. Well, those better and better flow configurations are all the designs of machines that have been parading in front of us through these 2 very lucky centuries. If you never thought of that, go to a science museum. There's a great one in Paris. There is one at the University of Chicago, right next to it. Go and take a look at these blueprints, if you wish, which are no different than the screens in a movie of how machines have been evolving. In fact, their evolution, the evolution of machines, is the evolution of you and Adrian as human and machine species.
So this is a big topic. We got a couple of questions to come in. You're saying that machines themselves have evolved to be more efficient, and that's
correct.
Okay. We've got a couple of questions that have come in, and one is by email from Ron, and he asks, your theory seems to have gotten more attention in Europe than here in the United States. Why is that? Is that true? And then maybe why?
I'm an American, and I do not.
Originally from Romania.
Yes, and it's a story told in the book. I came here to stay, meaning I ran away basically. So that was in 1969. Why Europeans behave the way you well, by this you mean really journal editors, magazine editors, and people who give honorary degrees gravitate toward the law of physics is an interesting question. The more interesting one is why the peer group in the United States of America has been slower. And I don't know the answer, although maybe hints of it are given in the chapter called The Design of Academia. So
yeah, you apply the constructor law to universities.
Yeah, basically, I urge you to connect your question to the greater view, which is in the book and in this particular chapter. But I have to tell you that because of this book, Design in Nature, the interest from my peers here in the United States has been extremely rewarding. I am, in fact, astonished by the response, and yes, I'm astonished by what it took for this response or for this dam to break.
Now, you've been trying to, you came up with the constructor law in 1996, so for 16 years you've been attempting to articulate it. Can you talk about that process? Have you been refining the way you explain it? Have you even sort of made some amendments to it? How, you know?
I've done all those things, but one thing I discovered is that the law should not be changed. The law is the way in which I published it first in 1996. The only 2 words that I would add in the very beginning of the law would be given freedom, quote unquote. Without freedom to change, a flow system cannot have design. So design without freedom is absolute nonsense. Tell that to an authoritarian dean, for example, A person who doesn't give its faculty the freedom to create, well, that person will have no creativity growing under his or her wings.
In terms of flow of ideas.
There we go. So, okay, so given freedom, I have not been attempting anything. The constructor law happened. It happened through an accident, which is the way really ideas happen in the mind. That the little story is how the book begins. And ever since, I've been having a lot of fun telling everybody that I have a secret. I have a secret, and with it I can predict the future. Because after all, this is what all of us do with science, with knowledge. With knowledge, we predict our own future. We design it actually, so that we do not walk off the balcony. We don't walk into the wall. We do better things for ourselves, including these machines from 200 years ago. And so I've been having a great time. And at Duke, I've been extremely fortunate to have the freedom to do these things, and along the way to publish these things successfully in other people's journals, in biology, in physics, in social dynamics. I'm an engineer, I'm a thermodynamicist, but I was embraced by peers over the entire spectrum of science, on all the continents, I might add. So it's been a lot of fun.
You write textbooks for thermodynamics, and have you begun including the constructor law in textbooks?
Yes, I included the constructor law from the very beginning in my textbook, Advanced Engineering Thermodynamics. The constructor law was, in fact, the thickest chapter in the 1997 edition, because clearly, as the law of design in nature, the constructor law of physics really beefs up, it strengthens thermodynamics. By the way, thermodynamicists have been invoking the constructor law from the beginning with Sadi Carnot, actually, without recognizing it as a principle. Sadi Carnot, in his only publication, his memoirs, which were published after his death, spoke of what to do to a design in the future so that the design would be that of a machine that's more and more efficient. He said, avoid this, avoid this, avoid this, avoid this. If I, because I like to make drawings, make drawings according to avoiding these things that he mentioned, including friction and other things like that, then I end up with a movie of, in fact, predicting the evolution of machines in the 200 years that followed. So the constructor law should have been in physics as early as 200 years ago.
And it's just now, since the last 16 years, you've been popularizing it. In describing it, you talk about design and evolve, and these words are loaded words in our culture, as you know. Can you talk about, philosophically, how does the constructor law relate vis-a-vis the concept of intelligent design that God made and ordered the universe? And also then, when you talk about evolve, Darwinian evolution, mutation, natural selection, how does the constructor law, what does it say about each of those?
Well, look, I had the great advantage that I was born in a different language. Romanian is a Romance language. It is actually extremely close to Italian and to Latin, of course. It's very, very close to Latin. And in Latin, the word design really means drawing. It is a noun, and it signifies that you see, the configuration, the image, the discernible pattern in time. You call that rhythm. And so it's pretty obvious. It's not controversial. And especially as an engineer, I'm in the business of designing things. I don't see any problem with using the word. In English, unfortunately, design is also a verb. It is to to design, to make
the architect's design.
To make a mental viewing, obviously in the human mind, and with it, after you construct it and attach it to, or you reach it, or you touch it, or you hold it, with it, you, the naked human, you are more powerful, bigger, live longer, and all these other things that come from possessing artifacts. And yes, if you think of design as the verb, then to design goes hand in hand with a designer. I've been a designer throughout my career. Well, okay, the constructor law is about the phenomenon of design in nature, which is the natural occurrence of these configurations, configurations that were acknowledged by the old Greeks when they came up with geometry. It is about nature. It is not
patterns.
It is about things that happen. Our science is really deep down is as clear as geometry. It is the search for the principles that stand behind the images that we see out there and in our minds. This other business, which is to design, and the designer, is something entirely different, and particularly the search for the designer. That search is much older, and it's called religion. Constructor law is not about that.
It doesn't presume a designer.
My work in science is not about that. My personal politics is about only one thing, which is that of speaking the truth correctly and not pulling punches.
Right, and so that speaks to intelligent design. What about Darwinian evolution? Again, you're using this term evolve. You're speaking about plants and animals. How does the constructional law relate to mutation, natural selection?
Again, I go back to the language into which I was born. Evolution, the word, was not invented by Darwin. Like revolution, for that matter. Evolution means changes in something that you look at. You can call that growth if you look at the chicken embryo, but the fact that something is changing in time is called evolution. Nobody needs Darwin in order to use the word, and I certainly did not need Darwin in order to explain to myself what idea, what principle stands behind all these images.
But you would say the constructor law speaks to how animals have changed and adapted over time, and plants.
Yeah, the constructor law empowers the human mind to predict, obviously in retrospect, the movie along which animals came to being what they are today. Each animal species today is one frame, the most recent frame, in its own very long movie of design evolution. In biology, we do not have the luxury to sit in a chair and watch the entire movie. But with the constructor law, we can do basically everything. We can see where today's design came from, and our work, very, very well known work now with the evolution of sports, is really an attempt to show how, in fact, we, the living, can witness biological evolution in our own lifetime.
We've got a question that's come in vaguely related to this, and a reminder to everybody watching that you can participate in this office hours conversation by email to live@duke.edu. You can tweet in your question with the tag Duke Live, or post to the Duke University Facebook page. So Andrew from Asheville has asked, is humanity's seemingly destined progression towards space travel a flow of the Earth mass into space? Does that mean that space is a better place to evolve or survive in the future, or are we relegated to our planetary conditions as a limit to our physical evolution? So predictions. Does constructor law say anything about people leaving Earth?
Leaving, no, but yes, expanding or flying higher and higher, yes. In fact, this topic is addressed at length in this book, in our journal articles. Humanity is a flow system on the spherical landscape. It is the constructed law says that this flowing mass, just like the mass of elephant mass in the migrations in southern Africa, is destined to flow more and more easily. From this comes the evolution of technology and science and alphabet and iPhones and all that. But it is also destined to evolve toward reaching farther, going there faster and more economically.
To put a marker there.
And farther means not only east and west, it also means upward.
Up and down.
Upward and downward. And so if you get that idea, then say, whoa, wait a minute, this is actually what's been happening. In the biosphere as a novelty on Earth, biosphere is a sphere that's more recent than the hydrosphere and the lithosphere. The moving of animal mass has been, in fact, spreading and becoming more and more efficient. Spreading what? From the oceans to terrestrial locomotion on land, and then from land the moving got even more powerful and more complicated through flight. And it stands to reason that this direction of evolution of movement will continue in both directions, upward into space and also downward. People are exploring more and more now the depths of the Mariana Trench and all these other places that are still unknown to us.
You touched on knowledge being connected to movement. That's sort of a whole other topic to get into. We got another question that's coming in from a viewer here, and Stuart wants to know, how has your work benefited from interdisciplinary dialogue and engagement? You've had to do a lot of that, starting out in thermodynamics and then touching these many disciplines.
Well, look, actually, this is a fantastic question, and it really gives the answer to other items that came up earlier. One is why there is a resonance from media in Europe, and the other one it was about why I feel very fortunate to be at Duke. In Europe, education in middle school and high school is very serious. It is multidisciplinary. The student is exposed to, I would say, every week to not only to geometry and analysis and physics and chemistry and all these other things we know about, but also to zoology, history, geography, and of course botany and biology. All these things are a part of what's known as a European education. And naturally, a book like Design in Nature, but also a principle with the reach of the constructive law sounds not only familiar but attractive to those who have been in fact raised the way I was raised. Now I come to Duke, and at Duke we have these people who are sociologists and philosophers of science and professors of medicine and economists. They are all around me, and they talk to me. I run into them. They live on my street. I am their patient. When I go to the Duke Hospital, look, Duke is well, it's a secret that's worth keeping. Actually, it's an oasis of intellectual freedom, and my work has benefited greatly from this great stroke of luck.
Great. So I want to get to, in terms of the idea of propagating, this is something we've been talking about, and it's a big claim to say this is a law of nature. People have missed it up to now. So I think, understandably, you say in here, an irony of the constructal law is that it is a scientific principle that challenges scientific orthodoxy while confirming impressions of the world held by non-scientists.
Right.
So talk about the reception of this idea. You're saying it's a scientific law. It has big predictive explanatory power. How, what's your case that yes, this is a law of nature, and that people will see that over time? Well,
the case there is a law of nature we have made for 15 years in peer-reviewed publications, and we continue to make that case based on anonymous peer review. We predicted with the constructed law all sorts of things that mechanical engineers should never be allowed to predict. Going from the hair on the back of the mouse to predicting global climate to predicting or explaining really how snowflakes should be, even though at first sight they look like nothing is flowing through them, and that's wrong. Predicting when droplets of blood should splat as opposed to splash. Predicting the river basin configuration, everything there's known about animal locomotion, predicting that at the Beijing Olympics the winners in sprint on land and in water should be taller. We've been doing all these things. And the case for this law of nature is well made. There is no, and that is why this law is now being accepted. The news that you read are about acceptance, not about controversy. But your question began in a very interesting way. It is about how does it feel when you tell people here's a law of nature that should have been known and used for 200 years. It's been overlooked. Well,
what do people say?
I don't know. I can tell you how it feels because it makes me understand how the little boy felt on the sidewalk when he screamed, "Look, the emperor wears no clothes." It is the truth. But it takes basically a nobody from where I come from to say it. But after I said it, the world is speaking back and responding with, "Look, everybody knows." This is the common people. Everybody knows that. It is wise to seek the path of least resistance. It is wise to be thrifty. It is wise to, if you can't beat them, join them. It is, the rich get richer. This is a hierarchy. It's another word for design with complexity. All the roads lead to Rome. All these things are truths that the children get from their parents and grandparents. Why? Because obviously they're true, but also because they're useful. They empower the growing human being to design for itself and for herself a obviously architecture always morphing for better movement on the landscape throughout a lifetime. That's the big picture of how the constructal law empowers the individual. And if you get it, then you see even bigger things. You see where city design comes from, meaning urbanism. You see where government comes from. You see the rule of law as basically a very short name for a highly complex and always morphing and perfecting flow architecture, because after all, the flow architecture means both the mud and the river channels. And the rule that some of you water have to flow through the channels, while the rest of you water wait in the mud. this is the rule of law in the river basin. Well, our movement on the landscape, and that includes, it's also called economics and business and security these days, is with channels, and government is that.
And that's all in the book.
Yeah.
I want to wrap up with a little bit lighter question. We've touched on governments and rivers and trees and airplanes. To basketball, we've got an email question here from Jack, who says, I've read that you think the constructive law can explain which teams end up doing well in the NCAA National Basketball Tournament. As we enter the second week of this year's tournament, do you think that that's been true, and who is your favorite to win?
Well, look, the constructive law, which begins with the words finite size in this realm of basketball competition, refers to the broad view, the big picture. Everybody on this landscape of would-be winners, all of them basketball players and basketball programs. It is about the entire flow system from the area, which is the whole USA, to the Final Four, and then the winner of that. So in this particular flow system, the argument that's fully and heavily documented in my work is that channels have formed in a very good fashion for the past 100 years. So they're
recruiting channels, coaching
you
staff.
can call them fame. You can call the basketball coach in elementary school knows where to look for or where to guide the talent and all that. So for that reason, meaning hierarchy is rigid or immutable. It is part of nature. So the prediction that it's pretty obvious with the constructive law is that the hierarchy of college basketball will not change at all from year to year. That is the prediction. The fact
but
that
different teams win different years.
different from the chosen few. Will win from year to year, but among the chosen few, there are even fewer that are chosen even more carefully, and those fewer win more frequently. So in this particular game, you can basically use my words and express your preference. But
so you don't have one team to tell us, but over time, strong teams stay strong.
No, but I will not be at all surprised if a perennial winner wins again.
Okay.
That's because that's the way it is.
Odds-on favorite. Yeah. Good. Professor Bejan, thank you for taking all this time to answer questions and explain your work. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Adrian Bejan is the J.A. Jones Distinguished Professor of Mechanical Engineering at Duke's Pratt School of Engineering. He is the author of Design and Nature with Peter Zane. You can learn more about the Constructal Law at constructal.org. A recording of this office hours conversation, along with many other Duke videos, will be available on the Duke On Demand website. That's ondemand.duke.edu.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.